beginning at verse 8, reading to verse 9, Song of Solomon, chapter 8. We have a little sister, she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she's spoken for? If she's a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. If she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. And so we're going to lock her up. And so last time we were together, we left off our study in verses 6 and 7. And the Shulamite, the wife of Solomon, has been making it clear that she had for her husband, Solomon, a love that would last. She said it was a love that was open for everyone to see. It was passionate. It was committed. It was built on sacrifice. It was built on service to one another. She made it very clear that God had brought them together, and this knowledge had cemented their commitment to one another. It was God who brought them together, and no man could separate them. She desired him, she said, to set her as a seal upon his heart, and she knew she was always going to be his. Her love, as we've gone through this, we see it clearly, was unfailing, it's deep, it's fully committed, and it's a love that lasts a lifetime. The love was holy. It was a purifying fire that could never be extinguished. It was fire that was so intense, she says, that even a flood can never put it out. She knew there would be difficulties. They'd already experienced some conflict. But the love they had, she says, is stronger than death. It's more protective than jealousy. And there's no material thing in the world that could ever mean more to her than his love. There would never be anything more satisfying for her than him. And of all the things in the world that she could have chosen, she chose him. And so as I was preparing the study, I began to think of where we get our ideas, we today get our ideas about love. Obviously, our first lesson is from our upbringing. The way that love was expressed in our home, well, that becomes a model to us, but there's also what we call common culture. And common culture sets a tone for us. It actually educates our expectations. The things that we hear about love from others helps to form our own ideas of what love is. It's especially true when we're young and we're developing our ideas concerning this. Now, for me, much of what I came to think love was actually originated really from the music that I would listen to. My mama was only 19 when I was born, and she already had another kid, an ugly brother, my brother Frank. Ugly man. But I already had a brother. His name was Frankie. So she had him when she was like 17. And so I was born when my mama was 19. So, you need to understand, just so I can make this more clear, this application, this illustration more clear. I grew up with a mama who was very young. So when what became known in that era as rock and roll, my mama was only 24 years old when there were guys like Elvis Presley and Little Richard. And so I grew up in a home filled with music. We had radio mama would play and all. And so in my early years, I would hear all these songs. I would hear a lot of music, and the songs and the lyrics of the songs had formed an idea in my heart of what love must be. Mama was listening to music all the time, and so you would hear songs. Some of you are old enough to know these. Others, let me give to you some ancient history. There were songs in the 50s that some may be familiar with, like "To Know Him Is to Love Him," or "You Belong to Me," or "Duke of Earl," "Be My Baby" by the Ronettes. That was a beautiful song, still love it. "Only You," "Stand By Me," "In the Still of the Night," "I Can't Help Falling in Love with You," "Unchained Melody," "Dreams in Dreams," and then the greatest love song of all time, "Wild Thing." There were a lot of songs that really influenced me as I was growing up. And that obviously would continue into my early teens, into early adulthood. I came to see that the lyrics of the songs would always produce expectations that were or were not going to be met. But they formed the way that I looked at love. They created, in many ways, unrealistic expectations. So, as we begin, what is it that you expect from love? And what keeps the fire going in your own relationship? I would be very quick to say, don't idealize love. Don't think that you're going to be kept from the problems that we encounter in life. You see, some people think that total fulfillment will come when they have the right partner. But when things get tough, sometimes this right partner bails out, looking for someone better. So the fact is, we should expect challenges and pain in marriage. There are disappointments, there are struggles, there are times of anger and challenges, there's loss, there's pain, there's possibility of financial struggles. Then as you grow older, you have the loss of those whom you love, moms and dads, and also sometimes children. There's the stress, and stress is part of marriage. Because the two became one, and so that just naturally produces new concerns. And so expect those things and deal with them, especially deal with those things in the Lord. And so, like this Shulamite woman, we need to make up our minds that nothing will cause us to stop loving one another. And so that's what we're seeing here as we're about to conclude Song of Solomon. She's already made it very clear that there's nothing that could replace this man in her life. So at this point, we have her brothers once again breaking in and beginning to share. And so in verses 8 and 9, that's what we're looking at. So this is her brothers, and they're speaking in verse 8. They say, "We have a little sister. She has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister in the day when she's spoken for?" So we have a little sister. She has no breasts. Well, today we have operations, and they didn't then. Something can be done to fix that problem. Actually, I should be more serious, right? I'm a pastor. These are the words of the Shulamite's brother. And what it's doing here is taking us back to when she was little, when she was a little girl. So her brothers are speaking of how to deal with a time when marriage will be proposed to their sister. And the brothers are reminding everyone that they've done their duty. They've protected her, especially protected her purity. And she's remembering what her brothers had said at that time. You'll see that in just a moment. They loved her. They did their best to protect her from those who would harm her. And I should, at this point, make it very clear that that's what brothers are supposed to do, right? An older brother or even a younger brother is there to protect the sister from being taken advantage of. I remember when my sister Madeline, who never had a boyfriend. She was so ugly. No, she never had a boyfriend. She'll probably hear this. Madeline, you're ugly. But my sister Madeline never had a boyfriend. You know, she was the classic good little girl who stayed home and spent time with mom and dad, didn't cause problems or anything. But one day she met a guy. And she decided it was time to bring this young man home to meet the family. And I remember, I had just gotten out of the military. I remember when she brought this young man to the house, she made sure that her older brother, me, had a conversation with him. And I still remember him coming into my parents' den, sitting across from me, and as a brother, I gave him, I asked him a lot of questions. When did you get saved? Where do you go to church? What are your intentions? I asked those because I'm her brother. It wasn't to be rude. It wasn't to be abusive. It wasn't to be anything other than to form that protective hedge around my sister. This is my little sister, right? That's what we're looking at here. We have a little sister. They're saying we protected her. We are part of that. Now, sometimes the sister doesn't like that. Why are you intruding into my life? Why are you bringing up things that really don't apply to you? Sometimes they get upset. But that needs to be done. You see, this man that my sister began to date is now her husband of 47 years. And so those are things that matter. And sometimes a brother will step in that way, and that's what we're seeing here. We have a little sister. She's young. What are we supposed to do? How can we help her? You see, they want to protect her. Now, if you know somebody who's being taken advantage of by somebody else, if you know a young woman and you're aware that the guy that's trying to take her out and be with her is going to hurt her and harm her, then as a friend, you have a responsibility too to warn them. So many times you know that when somebody is going out with somebody, one of your friends or one of your relatives for that matter, you know that this person's coming on just to take advantage. You need to say something. Today people say, oh no, I'm going to mind my own business. And then we let people get hurt. If you really love, you're going to intrude, even if they get upset. And let me be honest with you, sometimes they do. It's not that long ago that I entered into and made a statement in a conversation to somebody whom I thought was making a decision that was much too quick to be made. And this is somebody who had been a friend of mine for many years, and they basically cut me off from their friendship because I warned them. Sometimes you pay a price, but that's just the way it is. You need to be there to warn them. Be careful. Be aware. And that's what they're doing. By letting them know, you're actually acting what Ezekiel 3:17 speaks about when it speaks of the watchman on the wall. You're actually issuing a warning, and we need to protect them. We need to do what we can to protect them from harm. Why? Because we love them, not because we're intruding, but because we simply love them. And so the brothers are speaking about that, and they're asking a question in verse 8, what shall we do for our sister in the day when she's spoken of? Now that's basically saying, what should we do when someone proposes and wants to be married to her? And they go on and they say in verse 9, if she's a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. If she's a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. What are you saying? Well, that's speaking of her purity. It's speaking about her chastity, her innocence. So they're saying that if she is pure, then we're going to reward that. You'll see that in a moment. But when it speaks of the wall speaks of avoiding sexual sin. So the wall speaks of avoiding sexual sin, but the door speaks of welcoming immorality as an open door to seduction. So they're saying if she rejects seduction, we will provide generously when she marries. If she behaves improperly, we're going to take strong measures to guard her. And so as they're saying that, if she's a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. If she's retaining her purity, then we're going to be a blessing in her life. But if she's a door, if she's welcoming the wrong kinds of things, we're going to protect her from that too. That's what they're saying by using the wall and using the door. But now the Shulamite speaks on her own behalf in verse 10. She says, I am a wall. So she's saying, this is what I am. My breasts are like towers. I became in his eyes as one who found peace. And so she's speaking on her own behalf. She's saying, I have been and had been closed off to any who would approach me. She's saying, my purity and reputation have been guarded, and I refuse and have refused to be taken advantage of. My faith and my values have motivated me to guard my purity because purity matters. Now, she's assisted in this by the encouragement and the protection of her brothers who have already made that statement. Now, for guarding her purity, she's honored instead of ridiculed. But today, when you guard your purity, very often you're ridiculed. You say, well, where do you get that from? Well, obviously, our common culture ridicules purity. A 2017 Psychology Today article said this. They said virginity is a disadvantage. In the article, it reads, sexually inexperienced adults more likely perceive themselves to be stigmatized because of their virginity. They see themselves as less attractive than those with more sexual encounters. Virgins may not be desired as romantic partners, even by those who themselves are sexually inexperienced. A new social sexual script in our culture has largely abandoned virginity as a virtue. Indeed, having no sexual experience may be just as stigmatizing as having too much sexual experience. So you're pure and your friends make fun of you. There's years ago now, there was a movie making fun of purity, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. They make fun of it. They do. You know, look at this inexperienced person here. You know, we want someone with more experience. That's what was taking place in our time. But during the time of Solomon, this young woman said, no, I've protected my purity. I'm a wall. I've taken care of it. I've resisted any efforts to violate my purity. And ultimately, she says, I met my husband, and it was worth it. Notice how she says, I became in his eyes as one who found peace. I resisted any efforts to violate my purity. I met my husband. When he found me, I brought him peace. When he saw my purity, he showed me great favor. My husband didn't have to deal with the pain of disappointment over poor choices. He didn't have to deal with those things. And she says, I brought him peace because I waited for him. Now she goes on in verse 11, Solomon has a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He leased the vineyard to keepers. Everyone was to bring for its fruit 1,000 silver coins. So Solomon leased out vineyards. Her brothers apparently had leased a vineyard from Solomon, and they worked the property, but they would give to him rent money for its use. That may be the field that the Shulamite had worked before she got married that we saw in chapter 1, verse 6. So she's pointing out that he had a vineyard. But notice verse 12. She says, my own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000. And those who tend its fruit, 200. Solomon, you can have me. She sees herself as his vineyard, and he has a right to the fruit of the vineyard. Again, remember, she had just said, I have been a wall. She guarded her virtue, but this vineyard now belongs to him. And because she is his, she let him have everything that is rightfully belonging to him. Now, remember earlier in chapter 6, Solomon had said, my dove, my perfect one, is the only one. So she's secure. She's secure in his love. She knows that he loves her deeply, and his love and his devotion to her has given her stability and trust in the marriage. She knew that he loved her, and without hesitation would openly proclaim it. Now, she had earlier said, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. So that's the fruit of love. His love for her had provoked her to yield herself to him completely. She's withholding nothing from him. She's giving him the rewards of her love completely. Now, she had spoken of the vineyard keepers bringing him 1,000 silver coins, and that's the rightful amount of revenue that he was to receive for the land. But she now says to him, from my vineyard, you may have 1,000. Though it belongs to me, I give to you everything that rightfully belongs to you. I'm withholding nothing from you, including everything I am, my physical love included. In the New Testament book of 1 Corinthians, in chapter 7, verse 3, the Apostle Paul said, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. So she's saying, Solomon, you receive every element of my love as is fitting for marriage. And though he receives every expression, there are others that she also loves. So Romans 12, verse 10 says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. She's saying, I love others, but you're the one who receives the greatest amount. And so looking for some practical application of this, listen, when you marry, your husband or your wife is to be your greatest love. There should be no competition for your love and attention from anyone. Now, your mother and your father are not to come between your love for your husband or your wife. They're not to come between that. When Marie and I were married for less than a year, we went to visit mom and dad and all, and so Marie had gone into another room for a moment, and my mom was at the dinner table with me. We used to sit at the table and visit all the time, so that's where we were. I was sitting at the table with Mama, And Marie gets up and walks out, and my mom says, "You know, Dave, I need to tell you something. I'm thinking about Marie." And I smiled at my mom, and I said, "No, you're not going to tell me anything about my wife, Mom." "Well, no, that's my wife. I'll discover the things I need to discover by being married to her. But it isn't your business to tell me anything that you're feeling. I was that way from the very beginning. That's my wife. I'll take care of it. Don't be trying to intrude." My mom was very respectful, and I had a good relationship with my mom. By the way, I had permission to speak with honesty with her, so I didn't have to mince words. I just told her the truth. And Mama received that. And Mama loved Marie to pieces, but Mama also learned, you don't say anything to me about my wife. I discover those things on my own. That's how it worked, right? So be aware of those kinds of things. Your mother and father are not to come between you and your mate. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 2, verses 23 and 24, we read that the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." That is why a man leaves his father and mother, is united to his wife, and they become, Moses said, one flesh. Now, in context, prior to these verses, Adam had been performing the task of naming the animals. Remember that. That was his task. And in Genesis 2, verse 20, it reads that the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds of the sky and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. Now, Adam had a job, if you will. He was given the task of naming all the animals. And that took time. He studied them. And as he studied them, he would give them the suitable name. But in the time it took for him to do so, he saw nothing that had been set aside for him. So he's looking at the monkeys and giraffes and things. He's saying, "Oh, none of those are like me." And it gives him opportunity to begin to realize that there were couples, there were pairs, but nothing suitable for him. And it gave him time to become aware of the fact that he was alone. He became aware of his aloneness. The fact that he came to know he was alone without a helper was actually part of the plan of the Lord, because God said in Genesis 2:18, "It isn't good for the man to be alone." It's not good. The first time anything is said in Scripture that is not good. It is not good that the man should be alone. Everything else, when you look at the first day of creation, it normally will say, "And it was good, and it was good, and it was good." And the first time you read something in the Bible that says this is not good is when God said it is not good that the man should be alone. But he went on to say, "I will make a helper that is suitable for him." So he's experiencing being alone. There's no one like him. And so an inner desire that was there because God placed it there is now awakened. His desire for someone like him is growing. And that's why he says, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." Commentators point out that when he said that, "this is now," they point out that the words "this is now," it's literally "at last." At last, finally. It refers to him actually, it's in a cadence like a song. It's a beating of his foot. So it's like a song when he's saying, "At last." After experiencing being without someone like him, this inner desire was awakened. A desire for someone like him was there. He had been put into a deep sleep. He was awakened out of his sleep, and when he opened his eyes, there before him was woman. And notice he says, "She shall be called woman." Oh, man. No, she shall be called woman. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. At last, I have a counterpart. At last, I have someone who fulfills me. I have someone who completes me in every human way." And she became his first and most important love outside of his love for God. And that's why Moses says, "For this reason." For this reason, a man leaves his father and his mother. You see, the two becoming one has become the most important relationship There's the leaving, there's the cleaving. The word leave means to depart, leave behind, let go of, forsake. The leaving, the cleaving, it speaks of uniting, being joined together, to stick to or cling to. We leave the homes we grew up in to create a home of our own. Now, when you have weddings, I've just begun to bring this phrase into the weddings I perform. I'll use the phrase that's traditional, forsaking all others. And it's a phrase that is used in wedding vows. It means that we're committing ourselves to care for the one that we're marrying. We're there encouraging their dreams. We're going to meet their needs, and we're going to work to become one. It speaks of us protecting ourselves from outside manipulation by others. It speaks of us learning to bless our spouse and to value them above all others. In a practical way, it means becoming your husband or your wife's greatest fan, greatest encourager, the one who's beside them, with them, through everything, encouraging them, helping them, loving them, not ridiculing them, not putting them down, not making them feel less than they are, but holding them up, loving them so much that they know that at least one person in this whole world loves me. When this is where it becomes a bit personal. I've said this before. Perhaps some of you have heard this. Forgive me for repeating myself to you. But others perhaps haven't heard this particular thing. But it's an important thing in my life. It comes to mind as I go through studies like this. And Marie got saved in my ministry. My sister Madeline brought my girlfriend who became my wife. But Marie became my girlfriend who became my wife. My sister Madeline brought her to faith in Christ at a Bible study that I used to give here in Ontario. And so we began to date and all of that. And I was not that old in the Lord myself. Sometimes I need to say that because perhaps people think that I was. I wasn't that old in the Lord myself. I got saved. I went into the military for 2 years. There's not a whole lot of opportunity to sit under concentrated Bible studies. So I had gotten out of the military. I went through a period in my life where I began to backslide. I rededicated my heart to Christ. Then I went to Bible college. And so I was going to Bible college and taking doctrine. And so I began to teach a home study for my parents. And right around September of 1973 and in 74, I began to teach a Bible study in Ontario. And that's where Marie, as a visitor to the study, that's where she got saved through my sister Madeline. And so shortly after that, we got married. And after getting married, she didn't know the old David. She never knew me as the world David. She never knew me as the doper, and she never knew me as the alcoholic. She never knew that about me. She never saw that about me. That wasn't the man she married. That wasn't the man who was influencing her in the Word of God every week. That wasn't that man. She didn't know that I was still going through growth myself. I was a young believer. No excuse, but reality. I was a young believer still fighting with things. And so we got married. And over a few months after marriage, Marie's pregnant. But me, I had to quit school. I had been going to Biola. I was going to, I wanted to be trained and instructed in the Word of God. And I had to quit school. And I had a job that was barely making any money. She had to work. And we really were surviving. She made more than I did. So we're making her and my payments, but we had nothing. We lived in an apartment in Roland Heights off of Colima. Some of you would know where that is, by Fullerton. And so we were there in this small apartment. And we didn't have anything. I had gone to a Home Depot kind of store, and I found a piece of wood, and I burned it, and I got some stand, and I put screws into it, and that was our table, not a coffee table, an end table. We didn't have a couch. So we bought a couch for $10. It had a spring that came out of it, and we had to put a comforter over it. That was our furniture. Our bed was a fold-out bed that I had as a young man getting out of the army. My mom and dad had bought a fold-out, and so they gave that to us. That was our bed, and the springs in it were all messed up. We had a $99 TV set. We thought it was huge. I think it was 19 inches. It's a huge TV. We had a $70 table with 2 chairs. And that was it. And 2 cars that we brought into our marriage. One of them was a '63 Falcon. We didn't have anything. It's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having nothing. I mean, we had each other. But I felt like a failure because she deserved better. She should have had better. But I didn't talk. See, this church knows me as open. I haven't always been. I was very quiet with my feelings. I buried them. I wouldn't tell you what I felt. When Marie and I got married for some time, I wouldn't even tell her I loved her. I hid my feelings. I'm not the same man now that when she married. I was a different man then. I was growing up. And so I hit the wall emotionally. See, some of you will understand what I'm trying to say. I don't know if it's just a cultural thing or not. Forgive me if it sounds that way, but as a Mexican man, many of us don't show our emotion unless we're drinking. We're drinking a little bit. Baby, I love you. You're everything to me. But you better never go out on me or I'll kill you. Is that a stereotype? I don't know. But I grew up with that. I did. You don't say anything unless you've had a little, so it can become an excuse to say what you're feeling. Or if you're going to cry, to show your tears. Well, I was drinking. That's how I was. She never saw the heart. I'm a failure. I'm in an apartment with no furniture, nothing to offer this woman. And I just bottled it up. And I had to quit going to school. And now I've got a job that's not taking me in the direction that I want to go. And I didn't know how at that time. I didn't have any friends, fellas. That's why we need friends. And ladies, you too. But we need men in our lives that we can say, can you pray for me? That's why we put an emphasis on men's ministry. I know that. I didn't have anybody to talk to. So it was just me. And I buried these things. I buried them. And then one day, I couldn't take it anymore. I never cried. So I went to the store, I bought something to drink, I came home and drank. Wasn't enough. I went and got some more, drank some more. Now I'm feeling what I'm feeling. Now I don't want her to see me this way. So I go upstairs into this little room, our room, and I close the door. And I started to cry. I just lost it, weeping. But I put a pillow over my face so she wouldn't hear me. She was downstairs making dinner. And I heard her footsteps. She was already pregnant with Corinne. I could hear her labored footsteps as she's coming up the stairs. I saw her shadow because I had left the door just partially open. I could see her shadow when the door swung open. And she stands at the door and she looks at me. She's only 2-3 steps away, a little teeny room. She comes around and sits on the edge of this sofa bed that we had. What's wrong? I took the pillow off of my face. You made a mistake. You married the wrong man. I can't do anything for you. You deserve more than what I am. You made a mistake. And I lost it. Cried like a baby. And I had my hands over my face. She was young. She reaches over and grabs me like I am a baby and pulls me to her and puts my head on her shoulders and rocks me as I cry. And she whispers in my ear, I didn't make a mistake. God is going to use you. I believe in you. And I'm standing here now because of that. That's how it worked in my life. This woman, the Shulamite, said, there's nobody else that can be that for me, just you. And she used her words as a healing thing. I love you. Marie used her words as an encouraging thing in me, because she had my life in her hands. She could have said, you are a failure. I did deserve more. Look at this lousy apartment we're living in. I could have had more, and she could have. Much better than me. Much better than me. I know that. I married way over my pay grade. I know that. I know that. I did. But it's the love and belief and the encouragement that makes the difference. We can use our tongues to destroy, or we can use our tongues to lift up. Be aware of that. Be aware of that. And so we marry and we become one. We forsake everything else and begin to encourage the dreams and try to meet the needs and become the one that we're supposed to be. And we learn to bless our spouse and to value them. Now, again, we leave our parents. This isn't speaking of abandoning them completely. We don't love them less than we once did. We just love them differently. You see, in Jewish communities, the son would build a home on the father's property. There was the main house, but they had other homes that were situated on the same property. Jesus spoke of this, by the way, when he said, in my Father's house are many mansions. What he was saying is, in my Father's house there are many dwelling places. The Jewish community was built that way. When my parents first got married, they lived in a house on my grandfather's land. So did several of my uncles, as they were saving for their own homes, because my grandfather and grandmother had a little property there in Norwalk and all. That was common then, and sometimes it remains that way today. In our economy, some married children are living with their parents, and they're trying to put together some money so they can have their own home. It can get difficult. When Marie and I first got married, again, about a year and a half or so into our marriage, somewhere in that area, a year into our marriage, we lived with my parents so I could save up some money. We stayed with them for several months, maybe a year. We saved up some money, bought our first home. And so that is not what he's saying. He's not saying that you can't have relationship or anything like that. What he's saying is that you're leaving in an emotional sense. You're leaving in a spiritual sense. You're becoming one and having your own family. And the husband and wife are to cleave to one another. They become one. They're developing their own family. And some haven't learned that yet, and others have refused to do that. Sometimes wives will still go to their dads for advice or financial help without talking to the husband. Now, of course, the husband needs to grow to be able to make financial decisions. And as parents, for us, sometimes it's difficult seeing our married children who are struggling. We want to step in and we want to help them. And sometimes we can, and there are times when we should. But other times we need to step back and let them make their own decisions. And sometimes the decision will be something that we wouldn't have made. We disagree with it. But with the decision comes the learning. And with the learning comes experience, and prayerfully comes some maturity. Sometimes, and I mentioned this earlier, sometimes husbands can think that their wives are versions of their mamas, and they can compare their wives to their moms. I remember hearing of a man who was fighting with his wife over some bread that she had baked. And he told her, he said, "You don't make bread like my mother." And she said to him, I would make bread like your mother if you made dough like my father." I like that. When children are born, the husband can feel pushed out of her life. She pays her attention to the kids. See, Marie was that way with our children. My mom and dad, when Daddy came home, we were kind of not there anymore. So I married Marie, and it was pretty much the opposite. Marie cared for the kids, and I could feel pushed out of the relationship. I had to learn to adjust to those kinds of things. And so I had to learn to know that she grows tired during the day. She cares for those kids, and she does her work and all of that. And that's one of the reasons why it's a good thing to set aside time for one another, so that you can have that kind of quality. Now, with that, again in verse 12, she said, "My own vineyard's before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, those who tend its fruit 200. Well, Solomon, you own the vineyard. This all belongs to you. So the greatest portion of the vineyard is reserved exclusively for you." She's saying, I love others and I care for others, but you have the greatest part. You're number one. Now, my wife has always had many who have loved her, and my wife has the capacity to love a lot of people. But it's always been a very special blessing knowing that she loves me the most. That matters to me quite a bit. And she made Solomon know that. So we read verse 13, "You who dwell in the gardens, the companions, listen for your voice. Let me hear it." And the Shulamite says in response to the beloved, to Solomon, "Make haste, my beloved. Be like a gazelle, a young stag on the mountains of spices." So he says, "You who dwell in the gardens." Dwelling in the garden speaks of her loving quietness as well as her peacefulness. She finds her contentment in simply being with him. She doesn't need constant entertainment. She doesn't need gifts and vacations, clothing, and all those things. The things I've discovered that mean the most to us are the things that really don't cost us a penny. Visiting, laughing with each other, reminiscing, listening to music together. The simple peace of being together matters. And over time, you discover this. You create a tapestry of life that tells your story. And in the end, it's what creates your sweetest memories. And so we'll close with this. "Make haste," she says in verse 14, "my beloved, be like a gazelle, young stag, on the mountains of spice." Hey, big boy, come on home and enjoy yourself with me. Hurry home. I miss you. I'm waiting for you. Home should be the place we long to be. And we shouldn't long for anywhere else, because that's love's reward. It's something that you work hard for, and it's something that you decide is worth the effort. Now, you can come home to this home and stand at the door, and you hear a little commotion going on in there, little noise if you have kids. I had 4. And I'd be coming home from the office thinking, I get to see my kids, get to see my girl. I'd come walking up to the door, and I'd hear, going on in there. And I'd stand at the door saying, they don't know I'm here. I can go away for a while. But that's when I took off my ministry pastor hat, and that's when I put on my dad husband hat. And I said a quick prayer, God help me, as I walk in to be an encouragement to this family. And I would. I really would. I'd stand at the door, and I wouldn't stand at the door and knock. I'd stand at the door and pray. And I'd say, I'm home. I'd open the door, and that's what I would say. I'd walk in, close the door, and I'd say, I'm home. And that's what marriage is supposed to be. You come into your door. There's your girl. There's your man. There's your babies if you have them. Close the door. I'm home.